Welcome to Seekers and Shifters, where we talk to the world's foremost experts in personal growth and development and ask them everything we really want to know. Hey, Seekers and Shifters. In this week's episode, I'm talking to my friend Sandra Halling. Sandra actually just came and did my recent Art of Transformational coaching training, which was neurolinguistic programming and emotional clearing. And I saw her go through a massive change, even in the way that she was talking online immediately after. And so I just really wanted to talk to her about that and about coaching in general. And we had a really cool conversation that ensued from that. So if you, like us, are in a little bit of a post-election hangover still, and you want to commiserate with some people who are trying to just feel a different way about things, this is the episode for you. Please enjoy my conversation with Sandra Halling. How are you, Sandra? Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm good. It's good to be here.
Introduce yourself to our friends.
Yeah. So my background is in systems, doing large-scale content management for mid-market corporate clients. And like so many of us, I burned out in that process of doing the big corporate work and had to step away and found a more aligned spiritual path towards growing my business in the process of that. Yeah, it's been a wild ride and quite the journey of like reconciling what does that mean for me? Because as you well know, and your audience will shortly, I am a very like logical, linear, this is how we do things kind of person. And so for me, the woo side has to be very practical. It needs to feel accessible. It needs to feel grounded. But now I can't operate without it, right? And it leads the way into all the work that I do now with self-employed experts and helping them set up email marketing and CRM. I'm still doing systems, but there's a whole other piece that leads the way. So that's my jam.
Absolutely. And you were recently just here in DC with us at our Art of Transformational coaching training that I did with Mayao. We did NLP, we did emotional clearing, and Sandra left a changed person, would you say?
Absolutely. I don't think you can go through an NLP training and really the spiritual or the spiral clearing stuff is just magical, just as magical, I think. So yeah, I think everybody left a changed person, but for sure I did.
That's our whole jam is transformational experiences and the ripple effect of that. By the way, my producers tell me that anytime we mention NLP, we need to say that it is neurolinguistic programming, the language of the subconscious mind, for anyone who doesn't know what NLP is. And emotional clearing is a somatic modality through the spiral, which is a journey up through the chakras. And so just to give everybody some context, we did a training where we learned both. So the neurolinguistic programming, which is really about language and linguistics and communication. And we did emotional clearing, which is somatic and uses Ayurvedic pressure points on the body to release emotions. And what I think was really cool about the timing of this, I didn't do this on purpose, okay? We did this right before the election, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't know that Trump was going to win, decisively at this point. I am a liberal, on the woke side of liberal. I think you are as well, and many of our friends are. And NLP is one of the things that really helped me a couple of years ago break out from where I had been since 2016 in my, oh my God, I'm like traumatized by Trump, right? Like as a queer person, as a person who cares about all these people who are marginalized in different ways, like I felt so personally threatened when he came into office. And so did all my friends. And we were all lit up and we were marching in the street. I mean, I live in DC, right? We were marching in the streets every day. I was one of those people. And it was really starting to study NLP, neurolinguistic programming, that that allowed me to, it was not like it changed my political beliefs. Okay. I still have the same core political beliefs, but it allowed me to like be okay with other people believing other things and coming from a different place. And it allowed me to have a lot more peace in my life and just experience this in a much gentler way and say, oh, you think differently than me because you came up differently than me and had a different life than I did. And so I think what I think because of my values and my experience, and you think what you think because of your values and your experience. And we don't have to agree, but I can at least kind of appreciate where you're coming from. And I hope you can appreciate where I'm coming from. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because I saw you go through that training right before the election. And I saw you reacting the same way online where you had all these friends that were like losing their minds. And I mean, our friends are on the internet going, if you voted for Trump, then unfriend me. Like,
yeah, it was pretty intense.
I actually got some pushback just for saying, I'm not going to let anything bring me to hate, which I did not think was a controversial statement. But it, people are lit up enough that was received as a controversial statement online. But you, my love, having just gone through this whole training, were online going, I'm okay with what happens.
Yeah.
Tell me about your experience. Were you the same way as me in 2016? Were you freaking out?
Yeah, I got the chills just now when you were telling that story because, and to your point, I'll share my 2016 story in a second, but to your point, I am okay. I was okay when I woke up and got the news on Wednesday morning. And also I can understand where the people are coming from if, for them to say, to push back on you for not letting anything turn you to hate, because in their mind, it's become, if you're not with me, then you are for hate already. Like the whole thing.
And I remember being in that same.
My 2016 story is I was basically comatose, like awake, but not functional. I went on antidepressants. I had to scale back, and also workaholism is my drug of choice in a lot of ways. So I will bury myself in doing things as a way to avoid feeling my feelings or whatever reality things that need to be dealt with. So this was there aren't words really. It was night and day, the difference. And I think there's a really potent combination between the neuro-linguistic programming and being able to deal with the mind in a kind way that we're not gaslighting ourselves, right? I think that's important to say. And also to set the mind aside for a moment and find safe ways of releasing those emotions. Left to my own devices, I would not feel my feelings because that is not an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so the combo has given me a path, not only for myself, but for my clients to be able to help them. One of the things that comes up so often with the email marketing I do, I'm almost always working with people who are in some kind of a pivot, whether by choice or not. And in order for them to get through the pivot and feel like they're in it, they have to say bold things that are going to repel the old audience. And that's terrifying, right? It brings up all kinds of emotions of letting go of what's been working. And these tools work in those moments too. So.
I'm going through that myself right now. As you know, I am needing to repel. And it's not that I want to actively repel you. Look, I'm still one of you, progressives.
right.
I'm still one of you. It's like I want to repel you. And I do know that me saying things like, hey, I'm going to be, curious and open-minded and just kind of talk to people with different perspectives. And there's going to be a podcast episode that I recorded weeks ago, released this week that I'm a little bit nervous about. And maybe by the time people are listening to this, they'll know what happened with that. But where I talk to a guy who has completely different perspectives than me, very conservative perspectives, very normal, heteronormative perspectives in kind of almost like an Eastern European perspective, because that's where he's from and has lived. And I was very interested to talk to him, and we had a good conversation. I am terrified to put this episode out because I think people are going to be all over my ass for even giving these ideas a platform or giving somebody a voice. And I talked to a client of mine last week and I said, hey, give me a pep talk because I'm a little nervous. And he said, you need to walk with courage. Basically, look, you're a role model to a lot of people. You're going to do something because you're afraid to do it. And it was what I needed to hear. It was what I needed to hear because I don't make decisions based out of fear. That's a personal motto of mine. Right? And I want to acknowledge that it is legitimately terrifying when you've been working with a group of people for me about 8 years now, that I've had a specific type of audience, which is a very liberal, progressive audience. My original business was about, helping the progressive movement specifically. I've started to pivot away and get less political specifically in my work, but that's what it was about. And so for me to come and do, now I'm teaching NLP and I have this podcast where I talk to all different people with all different perspectives. There are people that are fuck you, Michelle, you are betrayed me. I think, you saw the comment on my Facebook the other day that was this is crazy from somebody I thought I knew better, right? That stuff hurts.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, and there's so many things that are interesting in what you're saying, but what struck me is as we are doing this attracting and repelling, right? There's this piece of NLP when we're talking about our goals, and are we going towards our goals or are we going away from what we don't want? And I think when fear comes into the equation, a lot of what happens is we talk in terms of going away from what we don't want instead of towards what we do want. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to say you're going away from the polarized audience that is not as tolerant, but what are you going to? What do you have when you step into facing what you want in terms of your audience?
Yeah, it's curiosity, it's shared understanding, it's how can we work together. It does come from those fundamental concepts in NLP of like the best communicator is the most flexible communicator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And when we learn to step into somebody else's model of the world, and hopefully they could learn to step into our model of the world, then we can always come to a shared understanding. I have seen the most batshit examples of this. And like, you haven't done master prac yet, right? So what Sandra did was the practitioner level.
Mm-hmm.
When you do master practitioner level, Sandra, you will learn the NLP negotiation model. And when you learn that shit is crazy. I've seen pro-life, pro-choice get to agreement, like shit where you would say these two people would normally just want to stab each other. And we come to common ground using this. That is what I want to move toward. That is what I think the world needs more of. I think politically, there are a lot of the center is getting really broad at this point, and nobody's speaking to the middle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nobody's speaking to the middle, and the middle isn't like this anymore. The middle is like this, and we're still dominated by the conversation on the fringes of politics. And there's pressure to get yourself into a fringe. And I think what happened in 2016 was a lot of us jumped into a fringe. I certainly did, and was like, well, I'm not on this team, so I guess I'm on this fucking team, and like I'm on this team. And I'm going to defend this team, and I'm going to march in the street, and I'm going to get mad if you say the wrong thing in the wrong way. And I think a lot of people, myself included, in the interim 8 years have been like, you know what? I want to be in here. Most people are in here. Like 90% of people exist in this middle place and are just like, okay, I'm going to lean this way or this way, but nobody's talking to that. And so I would like to be a voice for that.
Mm-hmm. For like actual moderation, like actual middle ground, right?
Yeah. Not like you have to be dead in the middle moderation, but for, hey, remember when we could have friends that felt a little differently than us? Remember when we didn't have to disown grandma because like my grandma is for sure a Trump person. She lives in rural Oklahoma. She has a high school education. All of her friends are Trump voters. She goes to church and she's on the farm. Am I going to look at her and say, I don't love my grandmother anymore because she has a totally different life experience than I do and feels differently than I do? It's insane.
There's an element there, I think, of like, one, it's like you and I are on the same page with, we don't want to be the people who are pushing others away because they have different views. I'd rather be the one to volunteer, to step in, to try and understand their perspective than to be the one that's going to turn to hate or exclusion or whatever. And that's a personal choice. And other people are making a different choice. And so it becomes this meta thing of like, I can still step in and understand from their perspective why they're making the choice they are, especially if they're terrified for their own personal safety or their safety of their children or whatever. I think that's what's so valuable about A, the tools we were talking about, but B, the shift that you're making in your own work. When I said moderation, you reacted perfectly because that is our definition of moderation, is that it's this like perfect middle ground when actually like more of us underneath have really similar values and want similar things, and we're coming at it from a slightly different angle. And so we end up in this ridiculous two-party system fighting against ourselves when if we got down underneath into the values and the belief system, there's more alike than there is different, and that's getting lost.
It's getting totally lost, and it's getting lost on purpose by again, I have worked in politics for 20 plus years. Like we do know that division is how people take control. That this is right out of the classic playbooks, and we all kind of fall into it and become tools of it. And I think that's where my moment was like, I don't want to be a tool of this anymore. I want to be something different. I actually, and if that makes people not like me anymore, you got to be okay with people not liking you anymore. Like, it was hard for me for a long time to feel like, and I think this comes from actually working in politics and having this trained into me for a long time, but to feel like it was okay if anybody didn't like me. Mm-hmm. It was almost like I needed to hoard people or you never know. And it's just like, no, that's fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it goes to what you were saying about sharing that other podcast interview that has the different viewpoints on it. And it's like, Some people are going to not like it. Some people are not going to like you because you shared it. And it comes back to, what are we standing for? And this goes into the work that I do all the time around visibility with people in the email marketing and sharing a bolder message. It's like peeling back that onion until we're down to like values and beliefs, and then building it up from there into, okay, now what's your methodology for your work? Is it congruent all the way through? Because when it is, then I think a lot of those fears of being disliked, they're easier to lay down and not let them. It's not like they just disappear necessarily, but they lay down and there's more space for us to take kind of what feels like edgier steps than what we might be comfortable with in this moment from our current perspective.
Well, I think you're hitting on when you say comfortable, right? It's like what we're really afraid of. Why do we care if somebody doesn't like us? Well, we're afraid to feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. We're afraid to feel triggered. Mm-hmm.
I say that all the time. Like this is your comfort zone and what you want is out here. So guess what you get to feel on your way to what you want? Discomfort. That is the definition. Yeah.
And you're going to feel it either way. You're going to feel it whether you're pursuing what you want, or you're going to feel life is going to make you uncomfortable one way or the other. So you can sit where you are and allow the discomfort to happen to you, or you can go and like choose your own discomfort.
Oh yeah. That one hits hard, man. That like when are we being the cause in our life, like influencing what's happening around us? And when are we sort of, just absorbing what's happening around us? Right.
Well, it's, in a way to say it, like a dual-sided way to say it, right? There's one thing in this world that you can control, and you can control a lot. You can control a lot about how you think, feel, and experience and perceive everything around you. And you are completely in charge of creating your own experience. And that is a triggering thing for people to hear. And I appreciate that. I'm saying it anyway. And I'll say to you and to anyone listening, the same thing I say to all my clients, which is, I am not here to not trigger you. That's not my job.
Yeah.
Yes. My job is in certain aspects to trigger you in a safe container.
Yeah.
So that we can work through it together and we can get better. Right. And I say that to myself when I'm afraid to put an episode out, like, it's not my job to not trigger me. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I know I'm going to read comments or get emails back when I put that out that are going to feel upsetting and triggering and like, calling me a traitor or calling me an asshole or calling me a Nazi or calling me whatever, or, one of the bad whites, right? One of the bad whites. The same people who, pretend that I'm, some kind of betrayal to queers because I'm dating a man, right? Like, okay, cool, whatever. There's going to be a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and what a beautiful opportunity for me to work through my own shit.
That's what all of this business growth stuff is really about. Like, you set the goal and then you feel the discomfort and then you decide to work through it or not. That's it. Like right before this call, I was having a conversation with a friend and she said something and I was like, I think I need to go lay down because I was just like, the reality of what she said hit like a ton of bricks. And we have a choice in that moment. Are we going to allow ourselves to like run and hide from it? Or are we going to be like, oh, I am feeling discomfort in my body right now. What do I want to do about that? What's my next move from here? And it can change. I think the thing that like I want to get across that I was a little skeptical about in my like practical woo, I was skeptical about this idea that like change can happen in an instant.
Yeah.
And I am no longer skeptical about that.
Look at this converted believer, y'all.
Yeah, I am. Not only did I experience it, but I watched it in others, and it's just mind blowing. It really can happen in like just a second. So
that's the one thing that I want people to experience when I'm working with them, either as a coach or as a trainer. It's that, because that's the realization that unlocks everything. Once you realize that change can happen in an instant, your whole world changes and you can't go back.
You can't go back. And I think that is probably the scarier bit, is like,
I know, I want to stay where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other women at the training, she was joking at lunch one day about how it's the no excuses training, because you literally could clear any emotion standing in your way and any belief standing in your way. And you also know a bunch of people who could help you if you can't clear it for yourself. And it's like, okay, so you just decide what it is you want to do and you clear the stuff that's standing in the path. Like, let's go, So it can be confronting.
It can be. Oh, I love that word. It's a word my Australian friends use a lot. Like, it's confronting. It's so true. And we talk about this concept of secondary benefit, which is, what's the benefit that I get to holding on to my baggage? Is it that I get attention? Is it that I have a certain identity wrapped up in this? You and I have talked about this identity piece, right? Because we both are neurospicy, and what do they call it now? ADHD, right? Where you're like
Yeah.
autistic and ADHD, right? And so it's like me and all my best friends.
Pretty much everyone I know. Yep.
Because
Yeah.
that's who we hang out with.
Yep.
But we both have that stuff and identify with that stuff, but we know people where that's their entire identity. And when that's your entire identity, you limit yourself, because it starts to become like, well, I have ADHD, so I can't do this, or I'm autistic, so I can't do this, or like, and you put yourself, if you're familiar with the drama triangle, right? You put yourself in that victim place in the drama, and your world starts to get smaller and smaller. But it's like, but what's the secondary benefit? Everyone goes, oh, you poor thing, you can't do this thing. And you get to avoid doing those scary things by putting yourself in a box and saying, oh, that's not something you don't understand. I can't do that because I'm X.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to hear you say that, because speaking of unpopular opinions, this is my edge, because I ran a productivity group for neurospicy folks and those with chronic health challenges for a while. And eventually I had to close it down. I knew it wasn't working. Like, the model, there was a lot of things that weren't working about it, but I couldn't have diagnosed it the way I can now. Now I can look back and say, one of the problems is that in that market, there is a fair bit of learned helplessness. And when I say that, I also want to caveat it with none of the things that we're describing are anyone's fault, right? It's not like there's blame associated with it. And I think when we get into blame in our minds, oh, they're blaming me for this thing, that can create even more challenge in working through it. And that's, at least from my perspective, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not blaming anyone. I think that there is a moment on the journey, and I can say this based on experience, because I had so many people who came into the productivity program in the beginning before I started marketing it as specifically for neurodivergent individuals and those with chronic health challenges. And what we saw is that the people who my approach really, really landed for were those two groups. And so then we started marketing it to those two groups. And guess what happened? It became very hard to market. Because the people who, my perspective, having been through that whole, bell curve of it peaking and falling off, is when we're using neurodivergence as the primary lens with which we're making all of our other decisions, we can end up in a space where we do limit ourselves, which is what you were saying. And there's a learned helplessness. We end up on the effect size of cause and effect, or the victim spot on the victim triangle. And none of those things will help us step into what it is we actually want. I think the key is it doesn't mean that the actual, paradigms or boundaries or systems that they're setting up in their lives aren't good. They're excellent. A lot of us need systems as neurodivergent people so that we don't have to make as many decisions. We need to reduce our decision making. That creates a lot more energy to do fun, creative things. So I think the systems are good. And also, it's just one facet. Right. And when we give ourselves permission to broaden outside and say, okay, so the way I'm going to approach this is going to be to pay attention to my energy and make sure I'm well resourced. And we have this checklist of protecting ourselves, no different than we would whether or not we were neurodivergent, just knowing ourselves really well and what works for us. I basically removing the label is kind of what I'm saying for a hot minute, and saying, what is it that I actually need, labels notwithstanding? And I think that can be helpful even within the context of, a very firm diagnosis, whether it's self-diagnosis or, a professional medical diagnosis, because all of those conditions or disorders are on a spectrum anyway. So not all of us are going to need the same things anyhow. So why don't we give ourselves permission to say, what do I need in this moment? And I think it changes seasonally, both in the macro sense and in the micro sense. It gets dark at 4:30 where I'm at right now, this time of year. And I'm late calls, not happening, right? It's just, I'm not functional. And also by March, it'll shift again. And so I think there's a lot of nuance in there that gets lost in the shuffle when we just use the label and then start attaching everything to the label, because it becomes one more box, and neurodivergent people don't do well in boxes. So
absolutely. I think what you're getting at is also part of what we're talking about politically. Like, I'm never going to say that some people don't have a harder time than other people for different reasons. Like, everybody's got different challenges and different experiences. I think where it starts to get tricky, and I think this is where the internet has exacerbated things in the last 20 years, is we want to group together. And we want to find people like us. And so if I'm somebody who's had a specific challenge, or I'm a member of a specific group or whatever, I'm going to find other people like me, and we're going to talk about those challenges. We're going to find camaraderie in that. But then it becomes an identity that then starts to take over. And so it's, God, I'm never going to look at anybody and say, you didn't have it harder than me for this reason or that reason. Right. And maybe I fucking had it harder than you for some other reason. Like, you don't fucking know what's going on with people. This is one of the things you learn when you start coaching.
You never know.
You could have the most privileged ass looking person in front of you, and then you find out some shit that went on when they were 4 years. Oh my God. We won't get into it, but like, oh my fucking God. Right. I will tell y'all that are listening that I have never gotten deep with a single person who didn't have some fucked up shit in their past. This shit is way more like upsettingly universal. It's upsettingly universal. Right.
And there's so much that goes with that. The fact that we don't talk about it, or that society doesn't support us talking about it more openly. And
and most people don't know how to release, or they don't have resources. And so this is where we start dissociating. But anyway, it's easier to get into a group and start saying, this is a shared experience we have that feels good. And then blaming, folks outside the group. Right. And it's, instead of saying, look, because I had this in my life, things were harder for me in this way. And that doesn't mean that I can't do anything. Where I start to get upset by it, Sandra, is when I see people from outside a group telling people inside a group that they can't do something because they're inside this group.
Oh, yeah, yes, 100%.
And you see that this comes from, this is where, and I'll just call this out. I take issue with some of the woke, like with the good white people stuff, where it's like, I'm going to tell you so that I can show you that I'm a good one and do this ally theater thing and whatever, that you can't do something else because of who you are. And I just think that's fucked up.
Yeah. The identity statement, anytime we're saying I am followed by anything else, is really something to slow down and pay attention to. Even the other day after the election, one of the things I posted is an alternative to I am is I'm feeling, or I feel.
Imagine
that's simple. That little thing right there, right? Like, our feelings do not have to be permanent, and they do not have to be part of our identity.
Yeah.
And it just, that little bit of I think what's fascinating to me is how a crack, just a teeny tiny crack like that in the universe of our mind, can create so much ease, because that opened it up. And because I was catching myself doing it, I am numb, I am tired, I am blah, blah, blah. Like, I was watching my own mind. That's how I knew. And I was like, whoa, why am I identifying with this? This is not who I am.
State. Like, I'm not going to be tired for the rest of my life. I'm tired.
Yeah. Well, and I think the ability to self-coach is, it's a skill you develop over time. So like, I caught it and I was like, I know I'm not the only one. And then it was like, all I could see in my Facebook feed was like these I am statements. And I'm like, we're stardust. Like, we are not these things that you were saying right now. So
I will say that's one of the hazards of learning this stuff, is that you can't like unsee it in everybody else. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, that's a trauma response. And that's, and it doesn't make you popular at parties. Like when you're like, okay, well, you're dissociating because you're having a trauma response. And then your friend is like, fuck you. I just wanted to bitch about my problem. And I just wanted you to, I had like a budding friendship that started last year and that ended because of this. Cause I was like, I couldn't unsee it and I couldn't not express it. And she was just like, I just wanted to talk. I just wanted a friend. And like, and I'm like, I'm sorry. I just like, that's legit. Legitimate. But you think you're going to be like helpful by telling everybody. Yeah, you can't unsee it. You start seeing it. Did you get any pushback when you started saying things? Because I thought what you were saying was super helpful. Like, hey, maybe substitute I'm feeling for I am. Did you get any people mad at you or pushing back on you for that?
I didn't. I had one kind of snarky comment, but I know the person, and my suspicion is they didn't read the whole post. They read like 2 sentences or something. And I was like, yeah, I'm not engaging with this. And I just deleted it and moved on. And I had several people comment and say that what I was sharing was helpful, that it was just like giving them a different way of thinking about it, which is one of the things I'm best at is reframing. So yeah, it was a fairly smooth experience for me. Yeah. And also I will say that I took great care of, or attempted to take great care to acknowledge people where they're at. Because when we do that as coaches, practitioners, even as a corporate consultant, if I didn't acknowledge where somebody was coming from before I'm like, yo, you got it all mixed. We got to fix this. But if you don't acknowledge where they are, people are just not as apt to hear what it is that you're offering. And so reflecting first is usually a valuable tool. So I did a lot of that. It would be like, starting with the emotion or the thing that I'm seeing that I don't think is working, and then validating why they're doing it and taking the blame out of the equation. So it's validate, remove blame, and then offer a reframe. And that becomes a very different experience for people in terms of like, because, we're, especially in that moment, we were all walking on eggshells. I think a lot of us felt like we were walking on eggshells, and when we're hyper aware like that, we're quicker to reaction as opposed to response. And so the smallest thing is likely to trigger us. And so slowing it down, creating space, and then in person, obviously there's things like the breath matters a lot and other components, but I had an okay experience. It was very edgy. I was very uncomfortable. I had to leave my phone in the other room after a couple of those posts because I was like, I'm going to piss somebody off. I know it. And I didn't, knock on wood. So it was okay. And I really did feel okay with what I had posted. And that was like my own edge of like, can I say this? This feels edgy. And then my brain's always like, if I help one person, is it worth it? Yes, post. Done.
I love that. I have the same thought because we do, like, our brains have this negative, there's a heuristic where we have this negative bias. And so you can have 20 people saying that was really helpful, thank you so much. And then you get 1 or 2 people being snarky and you're like, oh God, like, and it's like the fucking ratio is 10-1. Right. But we focus on the couple of people that got upset or triggered, even though we know logically, like, that's what's happening. They're having a trauma response. They're triggered. I'm not going to hold somebody at fault for the fact that like they projected something onto my words based on their own experience and their own trauma. I'm just going to hold love for that. And my responses, as you saw, my responses to those comments were, I love you. And it's like, okay, whatever, and it's like, but I do.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's triggering for people when they show up with like ready to fight and you're like, I love you. It's okay.
Yeah. They're like, go fuck yourself. Right. Like,
they don't know what to do with that in that moment. Right. Yeah. Because that is a sign of trauma and dysregulation, as you were saying. Right. And when we're in that moment, fight, especially on the internet, fight is usually the first reaction.
But that's not who I'm going to be. And at the end of the day, I have nothing but compassion for that. And there are people that receive that as condescending or like, I'm further along on the path than you. And I'm being, it's like, you're going to receive it however you're going to receive it. And I have nothing but compassion for that. I spent many, many years in that place. I can appreciate it. By the way, here's a little neurolinguistic programming trick.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
For meeting someone where they are, Sandra, you don't ever tell somebody I understand.
Yeah.
Because saying I understand just triggers the hell out of people. They go, you don't understand. You don't live my life. Right. So instead you say, I can appreciate that. Or you say, I hear you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love those. And I also just like to repeat back what they said, right? Like a literal reflection. Like, I'm hearing you say.
I'm hearing you say
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
I do that with clients a lot.
Yeah.
Especially when helping negotiate between business partners or something. Like, so what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes especially tying this to the neurodivergent ground, a lot of us are verbal processors. Like, I had a call with somebody new I'm working with the other day, and I was like, how do we want to deal with my verbal processing? It was like my main concern in our first conversation because I didn't want to overwhelm her. And also I know my brain will get to a mode where it just needs to like spit out the context. And like, as a coach, I know the content and the context, like, probably don't have any bearing on any decisions we're going to make. It's all mind drama, but it's got to go somewhere and if it doesn't come out, sometimes I don't even know what I think for myself until I verbally processed. Right. And so reflecting back the actual words it's magical. I have so many clients who I'll just be like, okay, did you hear what you said? And they'll say it again, but they won't use the same words. And I'll be like, nope, that's not what you said. What you said was this. So like, let's talk about that. Because often when we're not aware of what we're thinking, or when we're in that verbal processing mode, like the slips will come out, the like what we really think, right? And it's like, okay, let's dig into that a little more, because it's not always aligned with where we want to be heading and we can grow into. So
yeah, and we start to catch the dissonance. And when you're a coach and you've been doing this a while, you catch yourself, like you'll say something, you'll be like, I heard it, I heard myself say it. All right, let me just back it up. And it's kind of like what you were saying. I heard myself say I'm tired, I'm numb, instead of, okay, I heard it, I got it. Let me back it up. Let me come up with something that's a little more empowering. That's what all this is about. And people get, it's okay. Like, you don't need to come to anything until you're ready, because none of this works unless and until you're ready, right? Like, Sandra, if you weren't ready to receive the idea of being able to change in an instant, you wouldn't have even come to our training.
Yeah, absolutely. The timing was, there's a lot of synchronicities, some of which I can't share publicly, but there were a lot of synchronicities that played into that whole experience, working out and me being able to come. And yeah, I don't believe in coincidence, like those things. And it's cliche to say, oh, they're happening for a reason. But at the same time, I want to live in a world, and this is some of the things, we choose to believe are just choices. Like, I want to believe in magic, right? In a way. And that feels important to me. And I think there's some magic involved in all of this.
When you're a teenager and you first come up with this concept that, like, you don't believe in God and you're the only person who's ever thought of this, and everyone else that believes in God must be an idiot because, like, they're, and we, like, I still have friends, like, and it's fine if you're an atheist, like, cool, whatever. But I know, like, if you guys remember, if you're of a certain age and you remember, like, 10, 15 years ago, everybody was into, like, oh, it's a flying spaghetti monster. And they're, like, making fun of people who believed in anything. And you think, like, you're the first person that came up with that concept. And I wrestled with that for a couple of years, 14, 15, 16 years old. And I came to the point where I was like, but you know what? It makes me happier to believe in God. So I think I'm going to decide to believe in God.
Mm-hmm. How does it affect your behavior? How does it affect your choices? Right? Like, believing in magic makes me a happier person, right? It's that simple. And I think I had one coach, she's actually my first experience of neurolinguistic programming. And one of the things she used to say all the time, and she's Australian, she's a little cheeky, and she would say, you're lying to yourself anyway. So why don't you tell yourself a better lie? And I would be like, good point. Okay, got it. Like,
yeah. Well, and probably the better lie is closer to the truth. One of the things that we work with is the idea that there's not very much that's like a capital T truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And this is when we see people getting so lit up, it's because they think that their perspective is the truth. And so then it's like, if my perspective is the truth and you're saying something different that's outside my perspective, then you must be an idiot or you must be an asshole or both. You're probably a stupid asshole, because, like, I can see, I have eyes and I have ears, and this is what's happening. And you're just denying what's happening, so fuck you, right? And instead of, like, thinking, oh, they're actually having a totally different experience than I am, they're perceiving something completely different.
Yeah. Well, in those life experiences and all add up to different circumstances, like, the brick by brick, the wall gets built or whatever. And then you get to decide whether that wall is one that you're standing on and using as a bridge, or something that's blocking you from being in connection with other people, to kind of abuse the metaphor a little bit.
This is why I think that trauma release is so important, and why it's kind of the hill that I die on. It's not the sexiest topic. Like, if Sandra is writing my emails, it's not like trauma release is what everyone wants to click on, right? Like, it's important. Because when we don't learn how to process through our own traumas and feelings, that's what gets us stuck in this identity stuff where we're like, no, you don't understand. I'm this. And it's like, if I get to say I'm this, and then it's actually like, I don't have to deal with any of those feelings. I don't have to deal with those actual traumatic things that happened to me my whole life that have made me want to really solidify in this and find camaraderie with other people. I would rather just sit in them, a secondary benefit, and I will have a community around it, and I will get attention around it, and I will, not have to go for things that are scary because of it. And I will even, a lot of people will take this to a place of, you said, like, I have a bad feeling. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to go do drugs. I'm going to go drink. I'm going to go binge eat. I'm going to go have, like addictive sexual behavior, like whatever. Right. And like, look, some of these people have known me for a long time. They've seen me go through all of that. Like I'm not preaching from a fucking like pedestal on any of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it really brings a different perspective to our work, both mine and yours, that we've had our own varied life experiences with their challenges and our own individual willingness to face those things and like lean in to whatever discomfort. And one word that I don't know if we've said, but I think is a big, big, big piece of this is shame. Because, shame dies in the sunlight. That's number one. And so if there is something that you are feeling that you cannot share with someone, that is the marker that it is shame. And also an invitation to find someone who you can trust and just tell them what happened. And, if a coach is better because they're more likely, I think, a good choice in that moment. I say better, I mean better than a family member or a friend, because our family and friends, as much as they're well-meaning and they love us, they're going to be more inclined to race to give advice and have a harder time holding back their own perspective and judgment on that. But somebody who's trained as a coach, any modality really, but someone who's trained as a coach can hold that space and just allow you to be seen in it. And just that by itself is healing and can be wildly transformative. And then once it's out in the open, then we can deal with, okay, how has that shame impacted our behavior and our choices? What do we want to be choosing instead? Okay, guess what? Now a different level of discomfort is going to come up because we're going to be behaving differently. And that is the type of material that you get to work with a coach, one-on-one, long-term. So yeah, there's power in just turning towards it and not hiding.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, when you first start learning to be a coach, this can be really uncomfortable. Learning how to hold space is a whole skill, right? And I think, at one point when you were in the training, I was like, okay, don't give somebody a tissue. Don't pat them on the back when they're crying. Like, it's hard. And our friends and family, they mean well. And so they're going to want to like give us a hug, or they're going to want to, and in NLP, we call that a pattern interrupt, right? So I'm in the middle of my processing and you've just interrupted my pattern, trying to help me regulate. And what you did instead is like put that off into another time. And it really comes down to you were uncomfortable with my discomfort. And so you needed to make me feel comfortable so that you could feel comfortable.
Yeah, that is what we are doing when we are stepping in and interrupting. Yeah.
We do that all the time. If you've ever had somebody close to you die, people say the wildest shit. And it's so upsetting, right? My mom and I, when my stepdad passed a few years ago, because we have a dark humor in my family, we made up this game called the at least game because people will come and they'll say, well, at least la la la, or at least blah, blah, blah.
Oh no.
And so we just started making up the most horrible at least,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like, you have a whole bed to yourself now. And it was just like, it was dark, right? But it was like, it was our way of dealing with it. But like because people don't know how to handle just grief or anger or whatever, I had to start telling myself and people have heard this on the podcast before, but my trick was to say, it's okay to be angry. Like if you came to me and you were like, I'm fucking pissed at you, I'd be like, it's okay that you're mad. And it's like, I'm telling me and I'm telling you.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's space here in our relationship for you to be mad. Now that might make you even more mad, and that's okay too, right? But I gotta be okay with you being mad, because if I'm not okay with you being mad, our relationship isn't gonna go very far over time, right? It's not my job to make you not mad. It's my job to take responsibility if I did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did something wrong that made you mad and I'm like, it's like, I'm actually wrong. Like, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, forgive me. And it's okay for you to be mad because I did something that is worthy of you being mad about.
Right. Permission to have the feelings, right? Like, I think that's an interesting point too, because I remember a phase earlier on in my coaching journey where, not intentionally, but my ego got involved and I felt like I was supposed to be like laying down these feelings I was having more quickly because I knew how to self-coach at that point. And then it's like before you realize how much of a spiral it is, I think. And then at a certain point you're like, oh, this shit just never ends. Like we're on for the ride. And then you can kind of like take your hands off the wheel and relax a little bit and know that it almost becomes a little comical and amusing at at a certain point when you're like back at the same lesson again, because you're like, oh, I've been here before. I know this game. What's the new version? Let's go. And it's finding those feelings of discomfort is like, rather than them being a clue that you need to go the other direction, they can often be the clue that you need to lean in, that's the right direction, right? Because if we're going to be at cause in our life, in our world, in our communities, whatever, then facing the thing and leaning in is the direction to go.
100%. We get to the point, and this is where we're sickos, right? We get to the point where we celebrate when we get triggered because it's a red flag that there's some baggage to me. And it's like, ooh, I found some, like, ooh.
Yep. You're going to get to later. Yeah. Like you're on your way to your next level when the resistance comes up. That's the clue that you're headed in the right direction. And that can be so again, I use the word confronting. It can be confronting to like experience it, but then when you also know it intellectually and you can spot it in yourself, like that's also, it's like kind of irritating because like we're human too. I think that's kind of what you were saying a second ago. Like neither of us on a pedestal with any of this stuff. It's another layer or level of the spiral where you're able to see your own humanity, see other people's humanity, and create as much space for all of the range that comes with that, and allowing for it to be just normal, like accepting of it as it is without changing it, and holding space for other people to accept themselves without change. And that's what creates the space and the foundation and the safety to lean into the discomfort for the change that you want, right? So
it's an invitation, an opportunity to explore if and when you are ready to explore. And you will find out some really interesting shit about yourself, and you will deepen your experience. And it's also okay if you're not ready to do that. This happens in its time. And I fully believe that, for all of us, there's a time. And it was a time that came up in my life after 40 years of not. It's a time that people come to when it's time. So it's all okay, right? We'll just call this episode "It's All Okay."
It's all okay. Yes.
Sandra, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure.